and you have the talent and you're willing to work hard, there's nothing you can't do. And I hope what comes across from the book is the very clear sense that my parents instilled in us at a very young age that because we were blessed to live in this country, we would have chances they never had, that if we worked hard and we had the ability, there was nothing we couldn't do.
The NRSC, when they endorsed Charlie Crist, that was a moment for you.
I was demoralized. And, you know, you talk about running
National
against...
Republican Senatorial Committee.
Right.
We're going to get into Holder. Believe me, you're not off the hook on Holder. We're
Good.
going back to
well,
that.
I don't want to be. I want to talk about
yeah.
that. But I will tell you that on that day when the Senatorial Committee endorsed him, and I don't hold any grudges for it, but, you know, you talked about running
you're
against
Latin? You don't hold grudges?
Yeah, no.
I want to check that vowel at the end of your name.
I got to work on that, I guess. But look, the thing is that the... You know, up to that point, I'd been Speaker of the House. I'd spent my whole life dedicated to the Republican Party. And the idea that the Republican Party was now aligning to disqualify me before I even got in the race really demoralized me. And it was, even though I put on a brave face that day and said all the right things, privately that night as I retreated into my hotel room and called my wife on the phone, I was pretty low. And again, I'm glad I went through all that because I think it made me a better candidate and today a better senator than I would have been. But I can't deny that at the time it really, messed with my head, to say the least.
Okay, so American Son,
Mm-hmm.
you've been here now for a couple of years in Washington, and the discourse, the conversation often gets fairly heated, but I think for people who are listening to the show right now on 350 plus stations, they're looking to someone like you to re-energize and reinvigorate what sometimes is a party that is a few steps behind, sort of where the people are, and it's a Republican Party. Do you feel that you are up to that task of taking some of that burden off the people and representing them, not just Florida, but people across the country who have looked to you now almost from the day that you were sworn in?
Well, I wouldn't say me alone. I would say I'm glad to be a part of...
Well, you're one of a handful.
Yeah, that got elected this year. Look, the book outlines this. Early in my campaign, I like to say that my campaign grew up at the same time as the Tea Party movement did across. And what is the Tea Party movement? It's a collection of everyday people, many of whom are not even Republicans. They're independents who are angry at both parties. One of the great untold stories is that the Tea Party movement is as angry at Republicans sometimes as it does at Democrats because of its inability or failure to stand up and offer a clear alternative to the left. And if you recall, and I know you do, and maybe there's some of those voices still around, there's this thought process that the way Republicans were going to be more successful is to be more like the Democrats. We were fighting that as well. So I understand that early in my campaign, that's all I had, is the principles that this president was taking us in the wrong direction, and what we needed are Republicans that stood up to it and offered an alternative. That was all I had in my campaign, that and the support of my family and friends. And I try to stay true to that now. And I think writing this book reminded me of it. It reminded me of the everyday people from Florida that deposited those hopes in me. Not me, the person, but in the message. I mean, in the idea that we were saying what they wish they were in a position to say.
There are those who say that you wrote this book, the timing of it was the calling card for the Romney campaign. That you wanted to be considered for the vice presidency, and you wanted this to be laid out. Okay, vet me, press. Here's my book, vet me, which is an amazing story, by the way.
Thank you. But I would say two things on that. The first is I wrote the book because there was an interest in a book. I was approached and there was interest by publishers to write a book. And quite frankly, I said, yeah, let's do it. I think I have something to say. There was another book coming out about me. I figured if someone's going to if someone's going to write a book about me, it might as well be me. But we just got it out there as soon as it was ready. I mean, that's what we did with the book. We didn't want to wait till November or December to get out our story. But book's not just about me. I mean, I think at the end of the day, in the story of my parents, I pay tribute to America, and I recognize that my parents I'm no better than they were. In fact, I think my father and my grandfather were better men than me, and I say that in the book. But the reason why I've been able to do what they didn't is because I am an American son. I was born with the privilege and the honor of living in this extraordinary society.
The president, when he announced his 800,000 under the age of 30 pretty much can stay here, not be deported last week, that was seen as a way to clip your wings, because you had come out with this general idea, this general plan that wasn't totally specific, but was going to deal with the young people who are here. They didn't choose to be here, but they're here and they don't have legal status. He said that, these people are American in every way except a piece of paper. What was your response to that specific statement? They're American. They're here. They're going to schools, except for a piece of paper.
For a lot of that, they've grown up here their whole lives, and they do identify.
But a piece of paper means what to people? There are people in Nigeria right now who are desperate for that piece of paper. Well, I thought that was condescending.
What I talk about in the book is how complicated immigration, and you know this issue well, and I really respect the views that you bring to this, because it's not a simple issue. There is a human element to this. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you're 5 years old. Your parents bring you here. You don't even know you're undocumented until you try to go to college. You're the valedictorian of our school. You're going to be deported. You look at that and say, that doesn't sound right. I mean, we should try to figure something out. The other thing, though, that we have to remind people of, and there's not enough, and I've been trying to remind people of that this week, 1 million people a year come into the U.S. legally. What other country in the world even comes close to that? Nobody does that. 1 million people a year. I get people in my office every week who come in saying, hey, I've been trying to get my mom in for 6 years. We've applied. We've waited in line. We filled out the paperwork. What should I tell them? Come illegally. It's cheaper and faster. So that's legitimate as well. And sometimes anybody who raises objections to illegal immigration is labeled by the press and the left as anti-immigrant and anti-Hispanic. There's a real balance there that we have to strike. And I'd love to be a part of finding that. We were working on trying to find that.
Well, do you feel like he
politicized it.
Did he outmaneuver you?
No, he politicized the issue and set it back. He's doing it because there's an election in November. He thinks this is going to help him in the election. But what he's done is, in the long term, he has set back any efforts to try to deal with this issue in a responsible and meaningful way, because once again, they can't help themselves. Everything is political for this White House. There is no issue that they won't politicize. And if you look at it, almost by clockwork, every single week, this administration will bring up an issue or do something to pit one group of Americans against another group of Americans. It is constant. It is nonstop.
Marco Rubio's with us. His new book, An American Son, soon to be a major bestseller, undoubtedly. Marco, I call you Marco because I've known
That's
you
my name.
for so long. I'm sorry, Senator, you're so young. The story today about Eric Holder being about to be held in contempt of Congress, assertion of executive privilege long after the fact that these documents were requested. Your reaction?
Well, I have tried to be very patient and judicious and responsible in my statements up to this point, and to give the administration and Eric Holder the benefit of the doubt. I think after today, we now begin to wonder what many have begun to wonder, and I think we do so louder than ever. What are they hiding? There is something in there they don't want us to know. There is something in there they don't want us to see. And you begin to get concerned. What are they covering up now? I mean, is that what this is? Because ultimately, I think Darrell Issa has been more than accommodating and providing multiple ways for them to answer these questions without endangering, the ability of the Attorney General to do his job. But now they have really dug in, and to assert executive privilege a year after this request was made. What are they hiding? There is something in there they don't want us to know. And now you really begin to worry about what is being covered up here, because I think we've reached a dangerous new place with regards to this administration's contempt of Congress. And I don't mean the play on words, but it's also true, whether it's executive orders on immigration or keeping information away from congressional committees that have the right to know. I think we're in very dangerous territory now.
The president yesterday in Mexico fired back against the Romney campaign and Republicans, criticizing his foreign policy while he's at the G20. And he said, I'll remind the Romney campaign that there's only one president at a time. Politics is supposed to stop at the water's edge. Your reaction?
Well, I, for the most part, always appreciate having a nonpartisan, unified foreign policy, because it strengthens our country. But we also have a democratic society here. We have a republic here in this country. We have an open society where it is not just our tradition, but quite frankly our obligation to question the decisions of our leaders if we think they're harming the future of our nation. And for America, foreign policy is more important than for any country in the world, because our interests are found in virtually every country in the world.
Are the Republicans politicizing foreign policy during a campaign year by criticizing the president's handling of Russia, Syria, China?
I think that they're legitimate criticisms about the positions that he's taken and how slow and indecisive he's been on some of these key moments. Again, I think to the extent you can, you try not to politicize these decisions, because you don't want to weaken America's hands, and I certainly have done that and tried to be that way. But that doesn't mean we don't question the decisions that they make. And the idea that somehow foreign policy is off limits, that would be the first president in American history that's been true. I mean, George Bush was eviscerated on foreign policy. Ronald Reagan was called a war-monger by the left. And certainly Jimmy Carter went down primarily in many respects because his view of America's role in the world was so out of touch with that of most Americans. So I think every issue is on the table for debate. We should always be respectful in our tone.
Yeah.
We should always understand how important it is for us not to unnecessarily politicize foreign policy. But if the president's making mistakes, we need to point that out.
Putin apparently yesterday, and this is reported in the Associated Press, ABC, lectured President Obama, don't question our interest in Syria, and was extremely stern with the president. The president comes out and says, well, not everyone agrees that Assad needs to go, but I don't think Russia and China is countenancing the massacre of children. What's your reaction
I think
to that?
when you are as, and again, I say this with the highest amount of respect, but I think when this country, under this administration, takes as long as it does and dithers as long as it does about taking a forceful and clear position on key foreign policy things like what's happening in Syria, it encourages those around the world to assume that we're unwilling to engage, that we're unable to engage, or that we're disinterested altogether. And I think they'll press the limits of that. So certainly I think there's a domestic part of this. I think Putin certainly does this to play up back home how strong a leader he is. And our president needs to be aware of that too. But I think there's also this general sense in many parts of the world that the U.S. is no longer capable or willing of being a leader and forcefully engaging on foreign policy issues.
Do you think the president's out of his depth, or do you believe the president is going about this purposefully?
I think the president is a smart person, but I think the president unfortunately has a political ideology that guides his decision making that's out of touch with reality and out of touch with history. I mean, his view, for example, early in his administration, that the reason why we had enemies around the world is because they didn't like George Bush is absurd. We had enemies around the world because they saw the United States as an obstacle to their desire to oppress people, to impose their view on others, etc. And I think I don't know if he's realized that yet. And I think that's really what he has. He has a flawed ideology and a flawed worldview.
So Governor Romney says you are being vetted. Do you feel better today that you're being vetted by the Romney campaign?
Well, listen, I don't even talk about the process, but I have a new book out, An American Son.
Do they going through your? I have a question. Have they asked for your dry cleaning records, Marco? They want to know how often you clean your coats.
Oh gosh,
it can be very in depth. This vetting process.
I need to find that out myself.
Okay,
actually.
Great, Marco. Great to see you,
Thank
Senator
you.
Rubio. Congratulations. Love the book. It is a positive, happy warrior approach to life in America and lessons learned along the way. We really appreciate it. It's featured on LauraIngraham.com. All over the country, you can buy Marco's book, and I call him Marco because I feel like he's a friend of the show. Great to see you. Take care.
Thank you, Laura.
We're going to take a break. A lot more to get to. Stay with us.